Renee, so sorry about that. So this is something new, which we hadn't tried before, and we decided that we'd have a go at controlling wasps, which was not traditionally part of the pest-free remit. But if you just click to the next screen, thanks, Pamela. So why would we target wasps? Well, to be honest, it started out because people started asking me about it. I was going along the street, talking to people about rat control, predator control, and a few people said, you know, were we going to target wasps? So, yeah, I chatted to Peter, and there was a possible solution, which I'll talk about in a minute. But clearly, the other reasons were that, you know, wasps were a huge downer on people's recreation and enjoyment, and but also the massive threat to native insects and birds, and they really upset the natural food chain in the forest. When they're in their protein eating phase, they just munch through everything, including, I believe, baby birds as well at times. So there's lots of good reasons to target wasps. Next screen, Pamela. So the solution that we knew existed is Vespex, which is a wasp bait technology that was developed in Nelson because of the huge problem they had down there with wasps in the beech forest. It was developed by a Nelson-based company in conjunction with DOC, and they had really excellent results down there. It is an insecticide. It's a meat-based protein. Sorry, it's a protein bait that's meat-based, and it contains fipronil. There's absolutely no threat to bees or birds. It's a very, very safe way of attacking the wasps. They take the bait back to the young, and it wipes out the entire nest within a couple of days. So we felt very confident that we could trial it here because it had been so extensively tested in a very sensitive ecosystem in the top of the South Island. Next.
Mum, you're on the camera. Mum, you're on the camera.
So it was completely new. We had no idea what we were doing. We just started from scratch. And the first step was that you have to become a registered user of Vespex, because clearly it is a poison and you have to know what you're doing and there's a protocol to follow. But that was a pretty straightforward process. We used our PHAF database, our pest-free PHAF database for initial contact with neighbours to ask if they'd be prepared to have a bait station on their property. And then they would also then forward the idea on to other neighbours, and eventually we got sufficient neighbours involved up in our street, Te Ahuahu Road. So I was working in a very localised area, just Te Ahuahu Log Race Road, which you'll see in the map in a minute. We also worked in collaboration with another Piha neighbourhood group down in Piha itself, in Rainer Road, and they were helpful to me in learning and supporting each other. And that was quite an important part of the setup. And a lot of the time, most time-consuming work was just planning and implementing how we were going to install the bait stations. Next slide.
I'm going to hide this.
So this shows you, this map here is how I used Ecotrack data, which is the data collection tool that is well known by Pest-free Piha and probably quite a few of you others, and obviously Kaipatiki as well. And I managed to grab off that the map of our street area, which also gave me the total size of the area that we were looking at and helped me to work out how many stations per hectare we would need. And the little black dots that you can see are where I worked out where to put the bait stations and where property owners had agreed to have these. So it was a handy little bit of data, otherwise it would take me many hours to do those calculations.
Okay, you really got to get some
So
more
thank you, Ecotrack. Next screen. So here you've got some photos just showing, this was the bait station installation that I did on 20 properties. This is the bait station itself, which you nail to an appropriate tree. According to the protocols, it has to be 1.5 metres off the ground and some distance away from any water source. The main threat from fipronil is for aquatic life, and that was why we had to be very careful to make sure we weren't near any streams. Otherwise, it is very, very safe. So that was the first stage. Okay, next screen. So really, once we got the bait stations up, the most challenging part of the pilot was the timing. It's very critical, and because wasps only eat protein mid-season, and so you have to undertake a couple of what they call protein testing to work out whether or not the wasps have moved from sugar to protein. And we had to do this over a couple of, well, actually probably like a month. We had to do 2 or 3 tests. The first were negative, and we had to keep doing them until we could see that we had sufficient wasp feeding on protein to actually make it worthwhile laying the bait. The weather is also really important when deciding when to lay the bait, and I'll talk about that in just a sec. But first, let's move to the next slide where there are some photos. So here you see a couple of photos. The one on the left is the negative test where I went out, I put fresh tuna out. It has to be tuna that's got absolutely no flavourings or oil, and we got very few coming. You actually put out 20 lids, and you need a certain percentage of wasp over the total area. The one on the right, yep, we got the thumbs up. We got a lot of wasps. We're using fresh beef here, and the wasps, clearly there was a huge increase, and we were well over the threshold, and so we knew it was time to start baiting. But as I mentioned earlier, this is where the weather comes into play, because you also need a very fine weather forecast, which can be tricky out in the west, but we did get that day, and here you'll see I've laid the bait, which is very straightforward once you've got the actual bait stations in place. My partner and I did it together, which was quite handy because it's quite tricky managing in rough country and trying to balance and get the bait in, etc. On the right, you can see there's a wasp going for it straight away. We felt pretty encouraged as we saw wasps heading to it pretty much straight away. And according to the Ecotrack company, I called them afterwards to check because we had some rain a couple of days later and I was concerned. They said actually everything that is happening pretty much that first 12-hour period, if you've got a fine first day, that's 98% of the work has been done in that first day. So that was reassuring. Okay, next screen. Thanks, Pamela. So outcomes. I kept in touch with residents via email and a WhatsApp group to see how feedback was looking. And over the next few days, I got very positive feedback. As you can see here, compared to last year, it's amazingly better. We've had significantly less, etc., etc. So I felt really encouraged. Next screen, thanks, Pamela. And then I redid the protein test. So I again put out the same beef where we had the large amount of wasps I showed you previously, and there was a significant drop, 70% drop in wasp numbers when I redid that protein test a week after baiting. I was pretty happy with that, but I think there's room for improvement. I started getting a few negative comments, as you can read here. Some people still had wasps. So I was slightly disappointed. I was really hoping for a kind of 95% success rate as had been reported in Nelson. And I contacted Ecotrack for comment, but they were off work due to COVID, so I haven't managed to drill down into that yet. Next screen, thanks. But I think that partly our mixed results were due to the limited area that we included in the pilot. I don't know how many of you know Te Ahuahu Road, but it runs along a ridge between Piha and Karekare, and we were really only covering the residential area. There's a lot of bush either side. So I would love to see it extended to the areas either side, and I think we would have an even better outcome. Since then, I've actually talked to other neighbours who've been incredibly grateful and positive about the whole thing. Yesterday I spoke to 2 neighbours who just raved, and they didn't even know I'd run the pilot. They just said, hey, we've had much few wasps this year, or less wasps this year. So I was pretty happy, and I think it was definitely worth the time and the cost. Which brings me to my final screen, where I'm drum roll, which is coming in a minute, where I'm just going to thank our funders, Eco Matters and the Waitakere Rangers local board, who gave us funding to buy the bait and the equipment. It was not a particularly expensive exercise when you divide it by the number of properties, but obviously there's still that upfront cost, so we're very grateful for that. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Juliet.